Good morning, children. Welcome to today's science class. Today is session number 4 of our first lesson. What is our lesson name? Reproduction in plants. Okay. Before entering into today's session, let us have a recap of session number 3. What did we learn in session number 3, children? Yes, we have learned about pollination. What is pollination? The transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma is called pollination. How many types of pollination we have learnt in our previous class? Yes, we have learnt 2 types of pollination. That is self-pollination and cross-pollination. What is self-pollination? Self-pollination means pollination occurs within the flower. Means the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant is called self-pollination. Now, what is cross-pollination? Cross-pollination means the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of another flower of another plant of the same kind is called cross-pollination. Now, how is this pollination carried out in plants, children? Yes, through the agents. So, what are the pollinating agents we have learned? We have learned about insects, birds, and some animals carries the pollen from flower to flower. Okay, children? Now, we have learned that in reproduction, there are 2 processes. First process is pollination, which we have learned in our session number 3. Now, the second process is fertilization. About fertilization, we are going to learn in. So, in today's session, we are going to learn about fertilization, formation of fruits, and functions of fruit. By the end of this class, you will be able to learn definition of fertilization, understand the process of fertilization, recognize the importance of pollination and fertilization, understand the process of fruit and seed formation. Now let us see what is fertilization in our next slide. What is fertilization, children? Here, look at the slide, children. What is fertilization? Fertilization is the process which involves the fusion of male and female gametes. Already we have studied that fertilization is the second stage in the reproduction. What is fertilization, children? It is the process which involves the male and female gametes. Now let us see what happens after the fertilization. The fusion of male and female gametes results in the formation of zygote, which in turn develops into seed. What happens after fertilization, children? The fusion of male and female gametes results in the formation of zygote, which in turn develops into a seed. Now let us understand this fertilization process in detail with the help of diagram. Now look at this flow chart, children, all of you. What is this? Stamen. Stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower. Stamen consists of anther, and anther has pollen grains, and the pollen grains consist of male gametes. Now look at this. What is this? Pistil. What is pistil, children? It is the female reproductive part of the flower, and the pistil consists of 1 or 2 carpels. Each carpel consists of ovary, style, and stigma. And in this ovary, it contains the ovules, and the ovules has female gametes. Now let us see what happens to this female gametes and male gametes after the pollination. Now look at this picture, children, all of you. Pollination has occurred. After the pollination, what happens? The transfer of pollen grains will happen. Now here 4 pollen grains has fallen on the stigma. How is the stigma? It is a disc-like structure to receive the pollen grains, and even the stigma is also sticky in nature. Stigma is sticky in nature. Now here 4 pollen grains fallen, but out of that 4, only 1 pollen grain has developed a pollen tube. That means the remaining 3 pollen grains are not suitable to this flower. Now that pollen grain developed a pollen tube towards the ovary. From the ovary, it entered into the ovule. From the ovules, it entered into the female gametes. Now, what does this pollen tube contains? The pollen tube contains the male gametes. Now, the male gametes entered into this ovule and it fuses with this female gametes. Now, female gametes and male gametes fuse together and formed into a zygote. Now look at this flowchart here. That means once the female gametes and male gametes fuse together, and that process is called fertilization. What is that process called? Fertilization. Where does it happen? It happened in the ovary. And after the fertilization, zygote is formed. After the fertilization, zygote is formed, and from the zygote, fruit is formed, and from the fruit, we'll get the seeds. Now let us see in our next slide how the fruits are formed. Now look at this slide, children. Formation of fruits. After fertilization, what happens? Look at this picture. Sepals are there, petals and stamen. They are of no use to the flower now because already the flower got fertilized. Now what happens to these 3 parts? They will get dry off and fall off from the flower. Here you see in this third picture, there are no petals and stamen, but sepals are also there. But in few plants, what happens? The sepals will remain attached to the plant itself, children. Now let us see in our next slide in which fruits the sepals are attached. Look at this picture, children. What is this picture? Yes, it is tomato. And the next one is brinjal. And the third picture, what is it? Strawberry. Yes, very tasty fruit. Now, as I told you that in some plants, the sepals remain attached and protect the fruit that is developed later. In this type of plants, the sepals will be attached to the ovary itself and they will not fall off. They remain attached and protect the fruit which is developed later. Now let us see how the fruit is developed from the ovary. Now look at this slide, children. The ovary inside the flower swells up and develops into a fruit. Now see here pictures. Once the fertilization is done, slowly the ovary swells up and it develops into a fruit. See, this is the second stage of the fruit. Now, inside this, the ovules will be there, which develops into seeds. Once the seeds are completely developed, we can say that the fruit is ripened. See, this is the mature fruit. That means inside the fruit, seeds are ready. Now, what are the examples of this? Mango, tomato, papaya, orange, watermelon, etc. Now, let us see some more information about the fruits. Most of the fruits have seeds inside them. What are present inside the fruits, children? Seeds are there. And these seeds may be one or more. Now let us see the examples here. What is this first picture, children? Yes, papaya. It is papaya. In this papaya, you can see many seeds, right? So this fruit contains more seeds. Now, what is the second picture, children? Mango, right? In which season it is available, children? Yes, summer season it is available. Even the mango is called as king of fruits. Now, how many seeds you are seeing in this picture? Yes, exactly. One seed we can see in this. That means mango contains only one seed. Now, what is the next picture, children? Now, what is the next fruit, children? Orange. See, how many seeds are there? In this, many seeds are there. Now, which nutrient is present in this, children? Which vitamin is present in this orange? Can you tell me? Yes, C vitamin. It is rich in C vitamin. It improves our immunity. And what is the next fruit, children? Yes, watermelon. In which season it is available, children? Summer, right? Now here also you can see many seeds in this watermelon. Okay, children? Now let us see the next slide. Now look at this picture, children. Can you recognize which fruit it is? Okay, if you don't know the fruit, recognize the seed, children. Which seed it is? It is cashew. What is it, children? Cashew. Kaju. It's also called as kaju. Now see, this is a seed. Where is it present? Is it present inside or outside? Outside. This fruit has seeds outside it. Now look at this picture. What is it? Strawberry. And even on this strawberry also, the seeds are present outside. So, some fruits like these, cashew and strawberry, had seeds outside the fruit. Okay, as some major fruits have seeds inside the fruit, but very few fruits have seeds outside the fruit. Now, let us see the functions of fruit. What are the functions of fruit? The fruit protects the seeds inside it. And what is the other function of it? You can see here, children, in the picture. What is the bird doing? A bird is eating the fruit. That means fruits are eaten by birds, animals, and even we human beings also eat the fruits as food. Okay. Here the squirrel is having the fruit, even the girl is also eating the fruit. Now, what are the functions of fruit? A fruit protects the seeds inside it, and human beings, birds, and animals have the fruits as their food. Now, let us see a small video on fertilization, children.
Once a pollen grain reaches the stigma of a suitable flower, a tube grows from the pollen grain. This tube travels through the style and reaches the ovary. The male gamete from the pollen travels in this tube and reaches to the female gamete present in the ovule of the ovary. After that, the male and the female gamete fuse together to form the zygote. This process of fusion of male and female gametes is called fertilization. The zygote formed after the fertilization then divides several times to form an embryo inside the ovule. The ovule develops a tough coat and changes to a seed. The ovary, on the other hand, ripens and forms a fruit around the seed. At this time, the other parts of the flower, like the sepals and petals, fall off. So, a seed present inside a fruit contains an embryo, which is actually a baby plant. Each time a seed is planted in soil and provided appropriate conditions, it grows into a seedling.
Hope you all have enjoyed the fertilization video on children. Now let us see the terminology. What is the first term, children? Fertilization. Fertilization. Second term is fusion. Second term is fusion. Third term, zygote. Zygote. And the fourth term is pollen tube. Pollen tube. Now let us recap the sexual reproduction in plants, children. Now see here, sexual reproduction in plants. So what is the reproductive part of the plant, children? Flower. Look at this mind map, flower. Flower basically has 4 parts. What are that 4 parts, children? First whorl is sepals. Sepals are also called as calyx and they are in green color and they protect the flower during the bud stage. Now what is the second part, children? Second whorl is corolla. That means petals. Petals are very beautiful colors and they attract the insects for pollination and they have sweet fragrance also. And what is the third part, children? It is the stamen. Stamen is the third whorl of the flower and the stamen is the male reproductive part of the flower and it consists of 2 parts, that is filament and anther. Filament is a long tube-like structure and anther is a sac-like structure. It contains pollen grains and the pollen grains contains male gametes. And the fourth part is pistil. The pistil is the fourth whorl of the flower. It is the female reproductive part of the flower and it consists of 1 or 2 carpels and each carpel consists of 3 parts, that is ovary, style, stigma. And ovary is swollen part at the base of the carpel and the extended tube-like structure is called style and at the tip of the style there is a disc-like structure called stigma and stigma is sticky in nature and it helps in receiving the pollen grains during the pollination. Now there are 2 types of flowers. What are the 2 types? Bisexual flowers and unisexual flowers. What are unisexual flowers? Unisexual means we have learned that either the male or female reproductive part is present in these flowers. Such flowers are called unisexual flowers. What are the examples we have learnt in our session? Bittergourd, papaya, watermelon, muskmelon, ridgegourd. All these are the examples of unisexual flowers. That means the male flower is separate and the female flower is separate. Now the next one is bisexual flowers. What are bisexual flowers? The flowers contains both male and female parts in the same flower. Such flowers are called bisexual flowers. Examples like rose and hibiscus. Now after the flower, now let us see the pollination. What is pollination? The transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma is called pollination. Now the pollination is of 2 types, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination. We have already recapped in the beginning of this session that self-pollination means it occurs in the same flower itself. That means the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of the same flower, the same plant is called self-pollination. And cross-pollination means the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma of another flower, another plant of the same kind is called cross-pollination. And now after this types of pollination, let us see the agents of pollination. What are the pollinating agents? We have studied about the insects. Insects are biotic pollinating agents like bees, butterflies, wasps, beetles, flies, ants, all are helping in the pollination. And next, animals. Like what animals are helping in pollination? Birds, hummingbirds, and squirrels, and even mammals. Which mammal is helping? Bat. Bat is also helping in pollination. And next is wind. What is wind? Wind is abiotic agent which carries the pollen from flower to flower. The next one is water. Water also helps in pollination. It is also abiotic agent. Now let us see fertilization. We have studied about fertilization in today's session. What is fertilization? The fusion of male and female gametes is called fertilization. What happens after fertilization? Once fertilization is over, then zygote is formed. And once the zygote is formed, it turns up slowly into fruit. And from the fruit, we get the seeds. This is about the sexual reproduction in plants. Now let us see a video on the whole sexual reproduction in plants, children. Hope you will enjoy the video.
Learn about plant reproduction. The new plant generally grows from a seed. But have you wondered how? As we know, the flower turns into a fruit. Now we also know the insects help in the pollination, that is, transferring of pollen grains from the anther part of the male organ, which is stamen, to the stigma part of the female organ, which is pistil or the carpel. You know, if the pollen grains are transferred to the stigma of the same flower, it is called self-pollination. And when the pollens are transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same kind, it is called cross-pollination. As we saw, the pollination happens due to the external agents such as a bee, which is an insect. Other than insects, wind, water also help in the pollination. Hence, all of these are called the agents of pollination. The insects visit the flowers for nectar and transfer the pollens to the stigma. Generally, the insect-pollinated flowers are brightly colored, have sweet smell. They are also rich in nectar. Some plants have small flowers and the petals are not brightly colored. They do not produce nectar. The pollen grains are very light in weight and hence easily blown away by the wind. So the wind is the agent of pollination. For example, in the case of wheat, maize, rice, etc. In certain aquatic plants like the seagrass, the pollination is carried out by the water, as the water current slowly carries the pollen grains to the other flowers. You know, even few small birds like the sunbird or the hummingbirds, which have smaller beaks, pollinate the flowers. Few bats and rodents also pollinate the flowers. Now let us see what exactly happens after the pollination. As we saw, after the pollination, the ovary swells up, turns into the fruit, and the ovule inside the ovary turns into the seed. The new plant develops from the embryo inside the seed. This embryo develops from a single cell zygote. The zygote develops into the embryo, then embryo develops into the baby plant. So all starts from a single cell zygote. Let us see how the zygote is formed, starting from the beginning. A bee came and dropped the pollen grain in the stigma. Hence, the pollination is done. For the pollination, the pollen grains need to be transferred to the stigma. But why? The pollen grains consist of one kind of gamete cell and another kind of gamete resides inside the ovules. If the pollen lands on the stigma of the right type of flower, the stigma secretes some nutrients. The pollen grain absorbs these and starts growing. A thin tube grows out of the pollen grain. The tube keeps growing, carrying the male gamete. And it grows until it reaches the ovary. The tube reaches the ovary and then it enters inside an ovule and releases the male gamete inside it. Then the male gamete and the female gamete fuse together to form zygote. So when two different types of gamete cell fuse, the zygote is formed, and this zygote grows into an embryo. As the pollen grain comes from the male part of the flower, it consists of the male gamete, and the ovule consists of the female gamete. This process of fusion of male gamete and the female gamete to form a zygote is called the fertilization. The zygote is formed due to the fertilization. Then the zygote develops into an embryo, then embryo into the baby plant. This type of plant reproduction process is called the sexual reproduction. So, in the sexual reproduction of plants, the gametes participate and the zygote is formed after the fusion of male and female gametes.
Hope you all have enjoyed the video on sexual reproduction in plants, children. We'll meet you again in the next class.